And we thought it'd be good for you to hear from a professional podcast editor some tips and suggestions for making the best quality recording and for making it easier for you to edit if you're editing your own, or make it easier for your professional podcast editor to edit your audio, which will make it either take less time and or less expensive to do it, because it will take your editor less time. So I'm going to share my screen and bring in and introduce you to, there we are. So this is Jonathan Lind, and he was our first podcast editor. He edited the first 100 episodes of WTFFF, and that's his dog Jackson in the background barking occasionally. Hopefully he'll be quiet. He's becoming a friendlier dog. He actually likes me a little bit now. Anyway, Jonathan really is a very professional podcast editor, but he's more than that. He outgrew us, really. So he doesn't edit our podcast anymore. He is he's really doing movies and videos and public service announcements. So he's doing higher level stuff, but he certainly understands podcasting very well, and he knows a lot of things to help share with you. So that's why we've invited Jonathan on the show today. So Jonathan, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So can you start by and you can speak from your experience of editing our podcast or other things that you've done, but can you first give everyone some tips from a professional editing perspective of what people can do to make sure that they're creating the best sound quality recording to start with?
Sure. So the first thing is understanding kind of your environment. What sounds do you have? Do you have barking dogs like I do right now? Or do you have background noise? Or are you near a street? And so when you look at that and you understand what your environmental noise is, you can pick the right microphone. The different shapes of different microphones will pick up different levels of things. So that's the first place you start.
Can we talk about that for a second? Because
sure.
let's break it down sort of one at a time. I mean, the dog barking, I get it. And just to let our audience know, I mean, we asked Jonathan to do this and schedule this for this day, and he's like, well, I'm going to be on the road. I'm driving across the country, and I'll have my dog with me. We're like, okay, well, we'll deal. This does not need to be a studio quality recording. We want to get the information to our audience. So we're forgiving the dog barking today. So, but in terms in terms of microphones, tell us about the different shapes and their purpose, and because we actually have recommended to our people taking this program that they get the same microphone we have, and what that is. So tell us about the shapes of microphones and what that means.
Well, so the most common microphone, and I would say probably the best choice, is the microphone that you have right now, which is called a cardioid microphone. It's called a cardioid microphone because the shape picks up actually comes out in a heart. So if you imagine the heart coming out towards your mouth, kind of bringing in the sound, that's the shape. The other really common type of microphone for certain types of podcasts would be a shotgun microphone. The shotgun microphone can be anywhere from about this long to several, up to 2 feet. And it's a directional microphone. So WTFFF used the shotgun microphone when we went to the 3D Print Show Pasadena. That was a situation where we didn't have a bunch of mics to pass from person to person. So we had the person who was operating sound point the shotgun microphone at each person as they were talking in order to pick up their sound. So if you're going to be doing interviews in live places and you don't want to bring a bunch of mics on the road, shotgun mics are very good because the shape that they up is only about this wide, which is the width of the microphone. They pick up some ambience around the outside, but the center microphone of the microphone is where you're going to get most of your sound. So as long as you're pointing that at your subject, you're going to be fine.
So would that mean if you're in an environment that has a lot of ambient noise, that has, a lot of things you can't control, if you want to pick up less than that, that kind of shotgun mic would be helpful in that?
Well, it all depends. So
all right.
It's better for situations where you have multiple subjects that you need to capture without having a bunch of mics. But the drawback is, let's say, when we were at 3D Print Show, I made sure that we never had a 3D printer behind somebody who was talking. And the reason I did that was because if there was a 3D printer behind someone who was talking, the directional microphone would pick up that sound. So anything behind the object or the subject, you're still going to get ambient noise. The best way to kill ambient noise is by having a microphone very, very close to your subject, lowering the sensitivity so that only the voice that's right in front of the mic is picked up. And that's why when we went to SoCal MakerCon, I think, that's why we had the microphones right in front of us, so that the sensitivity could be lower and less ambient noise picked up.
Okay, so but most people listening to this are going to be recording podcasts in a studio. So the cardioid mic would be the best selection?
Yes. The only situation where I would say probably go with something different is if you are recording somewhere that has a lot of noise from kind of all around you. So if behind you there was a busy street, I would say probably go with something a little different, so that you could really, actually I would say if they're like to the left of you, if there was a busy street, I would say go with something different so you could focus the sound right towards you.
And would it still be that shotgun mic? Or
yeah,
okay.
Yeah, sorry, the shotgun.
All right, all right, but for the most part, it sounds like, and I don't want to go too deep into microphones, because I think most people were probably going to be able to control their recording environment, and the mics that they have or that we've recommended are seen to be the right ones.
Correct.
So aside from that equipment, what other tips can you tell us about for your sound quality?
Well, obviously making sure that your levels are good. You don't want your levels too soft, because then you're going to get background hiss and you're going to pick up things that you don't want. You also don't want, because of something called peaking, which is when your sound level maxes out and your recording device can no longer handle the information coming into it, and it creates a distortion. It's the equivalent of an image being overexposed. So if you were to look behind you, the window is completely white, which means there's no information there. And that's what happens when your sound peaks. So you don't just create this uncomfortable distortion sound, you actually lose the information of any speech, any sound that's above that level. And so you don't want to do that. There were a couple times where Tracy would get enthusiastic and we would peak, and I would lose what she said because it just wasn't there.
Okay. So do you think that people should not only review their level, and most people are recording using Skype and or Zencastr, who were, counseling through this program, and the only level indicators I think are within the Mac OS on the input, and there's the dots that go side to side. So what would you think is the ideal level?
Well, with something like a Mac OS or Skype, things like that, you actually have a built-in what's called limiter and a compressor. So your Mac is going to handle the levels automatically. If you start to get loud, it's going to shift its limit of how much it can hold.
Huh. So it's really taking care
and with anything automatic, I would say there's a pro and a con. The pro is that for the most part, you don't need to worry about it. However, with an automatic feature, what's going to happen is if you start to get loud, so if you were quiet, very, very quiet, and then you switch to being very, very loud, the computer's going to still take a second. It's going to realize, oh no, now you're loud. Now let me fix it. So you're still going to have that gap in between. So if there's really no way to monitor it well from the OS point of view, I would say that monitoring it comes from the people who, like you, have that recording, that mixer on the side, right, things like that.
Okay. But maybe really the tip here is obviously when you're podcast recording, we've recommended to people they need to be real, right? They need to be themselves and comfortable, you know, because we're talking on a period of time. Usually it could be 30, 40 minutes or more. You may want to be very careful about, you know, in the very beginning, speaking really low and softly, and then later on speeding it up, and then, you know, having a big difference in that. But not that you don't want, I think people, listeners would like it if you get really excited about something or fired up about something, that you show that emotion. But maybe people need to be more cognizant of sort of not having huge swings and getting sort of out of control with their tone and level of their speech, not so much the recording, right?
Yeah, I think that's because ultimately that's what you're going to be concerned about is, you know, you're going to set levels, or you're going to start at a certain point, and the only thing after that you can really control that you're thinking of, if you're not a sound mixer, is the level of your voice. Sure. So practicing ahead of time, big thing. You know, do a sample podcast for yourself and listen to it. See, okay, am I too low here? Am I too high here? You know, what's happening with your audio? And then you just tweak. I remember there'd be times where you and I would tweak, and I'd say, hey, this is a little too quiet on your mic. Let's bump that up, and let's bump Tracy's down a little bit. And we would fidget here and there every time that we would do a podcast until we found something that really worked. And then I think, do you still have a piece of tape across that now so we don't change it?
I don't actually.
I've that's dangerous.
I've removed the tape. Well, I've found that for different situations I've needed to adjust it a little bit. And
there you go.
I think I understand the mixing board a little better now. For the most part, we haven't really gotten into the mixing board in this course because it's really a sort of a quantum leap for podcasting. This is really a beginning podcasting course. I mean, we've provided some equipment lists if people are interested in that, in wanting to go to that level. But at this level, I think most people are not.
Right. Well, I think that there's two things to that story of, you know, tweaking until we found the right point. One was tweaking until we found the right technical settings, and that's where I came in. But by, you know, the 20th, 50th, whatever episode we were on, you and Tracy had become consistent. So naturally, over time, as you podcast, you're going to develop a style, and you're going to get used to it. You know, you are very different in your first podcast as compared to where you are right now. Once you sort of learn and get into that groove, you know, learning, okay, I was too low at the beginning, too high at the end, that's all going to sort of level out, provided you keep trying to improve yourself and, you know, narrow in on that, whatever your style is.
That makes sense. I agree. I think that the faster that new podcasters can get a lot of episodes under their belts, the better they will become. And even no matter how good they are when they start, you know, some people are just naturally better at it than others in the beginning. But regardless, I think you gotta do it. You gotta dive in. You gotta record, listen to it. I remember in those first episodes, I was micromanaging and giving you really detailed edit notes, cutting surgery, cutting up a file, you know, into ribbons and putting it together. And I was reordering answers and questions to, you know, because we weren't very good at recording it at first. And then as time went on, I think we got better at recording it without needing to, you know, do major surgery. There were just the natural things that you would cut out, like awkward pauses and certain ums and ahs that you could remove. But yeah.
Best as well.
Yeah, no, I think you develop a relationship with your podcast editor, but if you're editing it yourself too, I mean, I wonder how far people should go to try to make this, you know, completely clean final product, you know?
It will drive you insane at some point. I mean, I definitely know from, you know, editing my own projects that I could, if I wanted to, edit them for the rest of my life, never release them because they're never done. There's a point at which the mistake that you made while you were recording becomes just that, the mistake you made while you were recording. You can't fix it, can't, you know, go back and change it. There's no editing that's going to fix it, or it's not worth the time to fix that. So what you do is you just make a note. Okay, I don't have the time to fix that. I don't want to fix that, whatever. Make a note of it. Next time you record, don't do that. I think an important note is just, especially when editing, you end up hyper focused on every little detail. If someone bumps the mic, if someone coughs, you're going to hear that because you're editing it. You're hearing it over and over and over and over again. But what you have to remember is most people who listen to the podcast, if they listen to it twice, that's amazing. They're going to just kind of go right by it. And most times they understand, oh, they bumped the mic. That happens. I mean, you go watch any live production ever, they make mistakes. It happens. It's not something that I think you should stress about if it's truly those little oops, that's the little mistake, whatever. If your entire recording sounds like it's underwater, maybe go back and redo that. People don't.
Well, but we tend, when like one of us has sneezes or has to cough, because things happen when we schedule to record podcast episodes. If one of us has a cold, unless we've completely lost our voice, we still do that recording because we have a schedule to keep. So, but if one of us sneezes or coughs, I think we tend to try to stop, go back, restate something, hopefully in a way that and remove that sneeze or cough.
Well, that's a good point. So that's a technique, and that's a technique that you've definitely I told you about at the beginning, and as time and time went on, you got better and better at doing. So there was a first time in some of the early podcasts where you guys would do a false start, right, where one of you would start and the other one would start at the same time, and you forgot to give me a pause. In those instances, there's nothing I can do to fix that without cutting someone off, cutting the beginning of a sentence off, or just leaving it in there. But that's when, okay, I can't fix that. But I did tell you, hey, look here, this happened at this point. Next time, if that happens, stop, take a pause, which is what an editor would use when he takes a pause. He uses that pause to fade both tracks in afterwards to hide an edit. So it's like a bit of silence, blank space, blank canvas, whatever that I can use later on to hide any mistakes. So you take that pause, restart, all of a sudden I now have something I can re-edit and fix. So, but that's a technique where you learn from your mistakes. So
okay, so and a fade, just so for to explain to non-technical people who are still learning details of editing, a fade is what is lowering the volume and then raising it again, or what is it, to explain a fade technically?
Okay, so technically there's two types of fade. There's a bunch of different types of fades, but I'm going to talk about two. One fade is a just straight fade, which is basically going from 0 up until your full volume, which comes across as no audio, gradually coming in. You've heard it a million times. It's very subtle. It's the way you should start and end every podcast. If you don't do that,
less abrupt. Is that what it is?
It's less abrupt. Yeah. If you don't do that, it can be physically discomfort. There's pops and clicks associated with going from no level to 100. Like basically imagine a car. When you press the gas, you're not instantly going 65. You accelerate. If your car went from 0 to 65 instantly, I'm not a mechanic, but I think the engine would break. And that's kind of what happens with your audio. There's pops, there's clicks, there's uncomfortable, moments from the listener. So you want fades to start and end every podcast.
So is that a function of the editing software? At a certain point, you can just put something in the timeline that's a fade in or a fade out. Is that a feature, a function? Is it?
Yes. Yeah, it's usually lower end softwares. For like easy Audacity, use, like GarageBand. I'm pretty sure there's just like a checkbox or something really simple that automatically fades in and fades out.
Okay.
For higher end stuff, people who are hiring editors, they'll know what to do.
Right.
But for most times, 9 times out of 10, it's a feature that you can find very easily.
Okay. Yeah, I know. For those of you listening, I know that if you have a podcast editor you're hiring to edit your work, you don't even need to mention a fade to them. They know they will automatically do this. Don't worry about it. It's only if you're editing your own and you're learning and training yourself how to do basic editing. So that's a great tip.
The other fade that I need to talk about that is really important is called the crossfade. The crossfade takes audio from, so this gets a little technical, but Actually, I might have it on my computer up right now. Would you mind if I showed it? Because it's easier to show than to explain.
Yeah, go ahead. Just keep talking while you're doing it.
So a crossfade is used in situations where I need to hide some sort of edit. So let's say there's a false start, a cough, a dog bark. Essentially what I'm doing is when I make a cut in a single audio file, I end up lowering one volume all the way down to 0 as another volume comes up back to 100. So the way that it looks when you're in an editing software, once this opens just in a moment here,
Yep.
is, well, can I also quickly explain how editing softwares treat files? Because I think that's important.
Sure. Great.
So almost any editing software that you're going to deal with is non-destructive. What that means is that when you open a file in an editing software, it creates a reference to the original file. So on my screen here, can you see my screen?
We can. Everything? Yeah. I want people to understand, this is a highly professional video editing program that you can also use to edit audio, because obviously every video has an audio track within it, or audio tracks within it. So it has the full capability to edit podcasts. I think Jonathan used to use this for our podcast, even though there was no video associated. And it's a very high-end system. So this is, for those of you that are learning Audacity or GarageBand, this is going to look considerably different. But go ahead, Jonathan.
So this is a visual depiction of what a normal fade looks like. We have a volume level here. We have on the side, we have what our levels, where our levels are peaking or hitting, and it fades gradually down into 0.
Is that little gray line that's in the lower
that's this one.
Area? Okay.
Right there.
Okay.
So if you notice right on the little side as I lower it, it says negative infinity decibels.
So that's pretty much means nothing.
Yeah, it's exactly nothing.
Okay.
But if I'm over here, it gives me negative 9.34 decibels, which means I lowered it originally from its natural volume, and then I fade it down into 0.
Okay, I see that. Okay.
So let me show you a crossfade. So when you're editing, even like movies, you put a crossfade between two points so that you don't hear the difference in audio clips. But this is a crossfade, and you see that diagonal line?
Yes.
What that's saying is that this audio goes down while this audio goes up.
So you're saying you have two tracks, one that's the upper sort of blue track and the lower blue. These are two different tracks linearly going from left to right. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you are transitioning from one of them to the other?
Correct.
And it's two tracks, one on the right and one on the left, really. It's not up and down so much. Is that
yes,
left and right channel? Is that just left and right?
These are
left.
Here, let me.
I think I can see it, and I think people can understand it. I just want to make sure. So you have two different tracks that are butting up against each other. One is to the left of the vertical blue line, and one's to the right, like the one that's highlighted in white in the perimeter there on the left, and then you have the other one on the right. Now you've highlighted that in white. So this crossfade is a transition between the two. So it's not just an immediate jump from one to the other.
Correct. And so if there was an immediate jump from one to another, there would be an audible click that is heard that peaks the sound and makes it very uncomfortable. When you're dealing with multiple different types of audio, if we're switching to a different interview or something like that, you definitely want to use a crossfade to introduce both. So that one leads into another. When you are fixing a mistake, essentially what you're doing is you're taking out the moment that you don't want. So like if I didn't want this moment, I'm going to delete that.
Okay.
And then I'm going to merge the two together. Now, there still would be a weird sound here because if we really look in depth,
I believe it.
Which might be hard to do. So you see, it's really hard because there's a quiet audio track, but it doesn't match up basically.
Yeah.
When I do this crossfade, it blends the two together so that even though this is the same clip, it's now merged into one and it hides the edit point.
So really what it's doing is lowering the volume of the first clip at the same time it's raising the volume of the other clip? Is that what it's doing?
That is exactly what it's doing.
Okay, great. Got it. Okay. Thanks for that. That's very helpful. So let's cover some best practices for your recordings and file backup and things like that.
So I think this applies to all podcasters, whether you're doing it yourself or you're sending it to an editor. Almost more importantly, if you're sending it to an editor. I've gotten files when I've done editing jobs that make no sense to me. And what you have to remember is that when you give it to an editor, they're not there with you when you're recording it. They don't know what something is. And when we get a file that says, I've legitimately gotten files that are, this is the last version, period, I promise. That was the name of a file. I don't know what to mean. I don't know what to take from that. I don't know if this is version 5, 6, I need information right when I see the file. So it took a long time to get a fast, safe, everything file system for WTFFF, especially because we were doing so many episodes every week. The other thing is for those editing it themselves, I mentioned earlier, when you open up an editing software, the editing software references to the original file. So if you don't have a organized, simple setup, your editing software is going to have to go look a million different places for files. It's not going to like that, and it's going to crash, or it's going to get corrupted. So a good example, and this will change from every person's podcast because of different needs. Every project that I do, something tweaks in this process. But I start with what the project is. So, for example, for ours, it was WTFFF. That was a folder. You open it up. I originally tried different things, but what I ended up saying, this is the best version, was doing it by weeks. So, week 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I would put the episode numbers, like the first and last episode numbers, so I could have a quick reference if I had to go back and grab something. I would open that up. So WTFFF, what week it was, go in, and I'd have each episode number. And for ours, we had typically three files every episode. Intro, the main, like you and Tracy talking about introducing an episode, introducing an interview, and talking about an interview. Sorry, my dad's phone went off.
That's okay.
But
That's okay.
And then we had the actual interview. So I have those 3 files named very clearly. So I would have WTFFF 100 interview, WTFFF Tom Tracy, and then I would have intro WTFFF 101. So the moment that I opened up that file or that folder, I knew exactly what I was looking at. When I was editing it, I knew exactly what I was looking at. And that becomes really important when you're sending that to an editor, so they don't have to listen to the entire file to know what it is. That's how you're going to get the best speed.
That's really going to waste a lot of time, because
exactly.
they have to listen to everything and decipher what it is. So that's a good point. So you're saying, unless you're practicing and figuring out how to record your entire thing in one audio file, which is very hard to do, the different pieces and components to it, if you're recording an intro, then you're doing an interview, then you're recording an outro, or or a post discussion, whatever, make sure you really label each of these in a way that maybe indicates the episode number, so you know all the pieces that are associated with that episode number, and then what actual part of the interview it is, and so that your editor or you can easily figure out what the sequence of the clips needs to be.
Correct. And the other thing is, if you're looking for a specific file or specific interview months and months and months later, when we did our 100th anniversary, we were originally playing with doing some look back on some cool interviews. And if I didn't do that system, or that system of organization, and Tracy came to me and said, hey, we want to go look back on interview from episode 50, I'd have to remember where I put that and hope that I could find it. Or I could just type WTFFF 50 into any search, whether Windows or Mac or whatever, and it comes up. So it's not just for editing. It's not just for sending it off to an editor. It's also for your archival purposes. labeling it with something really, really simple and really, really descriptive just helps you keep track of all of your information. You don't want to lose that. You're spending a long time creating it and making it. You want to make sure that you can keep it for long periods of time.
That's a really great tip. You know, to this day, we still have we are saving all the files for every week of episodes in different folders for that week by date, and then I also have those saved in actually two different places internally in our office. I have a USB USB external hard drive that's, I forget, three or 5 terabytes or something, that I have still all the raw audio on, and then I also have sort of a little cloud server device here at our office that I also have it backed up on. So I've got it backed up in a couple of different places. Plus, it's on the cloud when it goes to our podcast editor. So it probably exists in at least 3 places. And that's very important, because I remember there were a couple times when you would pull the raw audio down from our cloud server and something in that process would corrupt the file. And
and that was very specific to how we did it. So to let people know, Tom and Tracy don't live anywhere near me. We live almost 100 miles apart. So every episode had to be uploaded to that personal cloud server that I accessed from my house. And just a note to people, that has the risk of sometimes when I would download it, if my computer would go to sleep in the middle of the download and I wouldn't realize it, or if something little happened, I'd be editing an episode and all of a sudden the audio would just cut off, or sometimes the audio wouldn't import. And all you have to do is just download it again, make sure your computer stays on, that kind of thing, but it's fixed. So that was kind of specific to our setup. I don't think it's too uncommon for people who are going to be sending it to editors and whatnot, but it's definitely worth the note that when you do transfer files that way, it is a little risky. Make sure once you put them onto the cloud or whatever, you still have a backup physically in case for whatever reason the file was damaged in the upload process on your end. Then I would have to come get it from you myself, but you still have it.
Yeah, you just got to make sure you have it. Last thing you want to do is not have a podcast because you don't have an audio file anymore. So save everything, back it up in different places, not in 2 different folders on one computer. Put it on something else external. It's a really good practice. Okay.
It's like those apocalypse survivor prep things. Just pretend like everything will go wrong. Yeah. And back it up as many places. Just give it to a friend's house and out of state if you need to. But that's the biggest advice, is back up and save and everything. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, Johnson, thank you so much. It's been very helpful. I don't want to keep you too much longer. You've been great to spend some time and share your thoughts.
Thank you.
And it's great to have it from a professional editor's perspective as opposed to our, host perspective.
Yeah.
So, all right.
Thank you.
Well,
appreciate it.
Hey, have a great trip. And
thank you very much.
And, I'm sure we'll talk to you again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, and wish everybody the best of luck.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, everybody. So, that went in a couple different places, from some equipment to, some best practices in terms of, your, how you're going to record initially and then how you make it better over time. And some thoughts there, to actually some technical details about editing in and of itself. And then I like how that ended up with, some computer file practices. That's a really good point, and something that I would definitely implement if I were you into your process. So hopefully you got some good stuff out of that.